All right, sixth graders, we're back with another video. And for today's notes, it will actually be really helpful for you if you have two different color pens or pencils, or I'm going to use these two different color pens, but if you even had colored pencils or something, it would be really helpful to have those for today's notes. Of course, your pencil as well. So we're going to start writing notes like normal. So we talked last video about multiplying a fraction times a whole number, and today on page 8 we're going to talk about multiplying fractions by fractions. So what does it mean to multiply a fraction by another fraction? And if you will remember, this is just from the last video. The last video we said that something like, this is from last video. We said if you have 2 times 1/3, that we could rewrite that as 2 groups of 1/3, right? Remember that from the last video? So today, while we're doing fraction times a fraction, we're going to see something like this. So we might see like 1/2 times 3/4. And when we see a fraction times a fraction, we have to think of it as this. This is how we're going to interpret this. Fraction times a fraction. It's 1/2 of 3/4. So it's almost like the multiplication symbol can be read as the word of. It's kind of like a group of, only when you have half, you don't really have a half group. You just have half of something. And so we're going to think about that in the context of a multiplication problem. And so there's 2 different strategies. So we're going to call this strategy number 1. Strategy number 1 involves pictures, or models, we might say. And we did this similarly in the last video, right? We used pictures to solve the problems first, and so that's what we're going to do here. So let's think back to our problem that we talked about up here, 1/2 times 3/4. So I'm going to rewrite that here. So let's do 1/2 times 3/4. So that's my problem that I'm dealing with. And I want to represent half of 3/4. So when I'm multiplying a fraction by fraction and I want to do it by a picture, here's how I'm going to draw this. I'm going to draw a box, just a rectangle. And again, I'm going to think about what this question is asking me. It's asking me to find half of 3/4. And so what I'm going to do is if I'm looking for half of something, I'm going to go ahead and split this box in half. Now, it doesn't matter if you split it in half across or if you split it up and down. I'm going to do it up and down first, just to go ahead and illustrate. So again, this fraction, 1/2, and this is where our colored pencils are going to come into play, 1/2 is going to be represented by splitting this box in half, and I'm going to shade 1 out of 2 pieces. So again, hopefully you can see that this picture now represents 1/2. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the second fraction. So I'm going to use a different color here. I'm going to use this green. And I'm going to think about what would it look like to see 3/4 in this picture. And again, maybe even think of this as like, I don't know, a cake. And so again, we're finding like half of 3/4. So we first cut the cake into 1/2. So we cut the cake in half. Maybe we put orange icing on this side. And now we're going to need to find 3/4. Now, the thing about the cake is that it's already been cut up and down. And so in order to represent the 3/4, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to cut the cake across now, right? If you're going to make cake pieces, you want to cut in the opposite direction. So I'm going to use the 3/4, and I'm going to, instead of going up and down like I did cut the 1/2, now I'm going to represent 3/4 going across. So I'm going to split my box into 4ths. Now remember, if you need 4ths, that's going to be 3 lines. So I just cut my cake 1, 2, 3 times, and that makes 1, 2, 3, 4 long pieces here. And so I'm going to shade them in and maybe even I can number them to help you. So here's 1 piece, 2, 3, 4. Those are my fourths. They're running all the way across the cake. And we already had the half here, right? This was 1/2 out of the 2. And so I'm going to use my other color pencil to represent 3 of those fourths. So here's one, I'm just going to do it in stripes. Here is 1/4. That's 1 out of the 4 pieces that run across. Here's 2 of them. Here's 3 of them. And I'm going to go all the way across. That's 3/4. So remember what our whole goal is here, is to find half of 3/4. So if you see the 3/4, there's 3 out of 4 here, there's half of it here. Here's how we find our final answer. We look for the pieces that got shaded twice. That represents half of the 3/4. And so I'm going to count the double shaded pieces. So 1, 2, 3. There are 3 pieces that got double shaded. Out of how many total? Well, again, think about this as a cake. If this is a cake and I made all these cuts, how many pieces of cake do I have? So there's a piece of cake here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I end up with the answer 3/8. So 8 goes on the bottom because that's how many pieces I had. 3 comes from the pieces that got double shaded. Now we're going to do another one of these picture or models just to make sure we get this idea. So let's do 4/5 times 2/3. And so again, remember that multiplication symbol, we really think of it as of. So what we're really asking ourselves here is, what is 4/5 of 2/3? 4/5 of 2/3. And we're going to bake a cake or draw a square or a rectangle in order to help us solve this problem. So again, I'm going to look at my first fraction, and my first fraction is 4/5, and I'm going to cut my cake up and down first. So we need 4/5. We want to see, what does 4/5 look like? And if I'm going to get fifths, then I need 4 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there is my 4/5. I'm going to shade in 4 of those now. And so I'm going to use, again, one of my colors to shade in 4 out of 5. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And that represents my first fraction. Now to represent the 2/3, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. So I was slicing my cake up and down. Now I'm going to slice my cake across, and I want 2/3. Well, I want thirds. That means I'm going to have to make 2 lines in order to create thirds. So I'm going to go all the way across, 1, 2, and I'm going to shade in. And again, if you number them, it makes it more helpful. So you can see 1 row, 2 row, 3 rows. There's thirds going across here. Of course, across the top, there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. We could actually call these columns, right? So we've got 5 columns total, but 4 of them got shaded in orange. So now we're concentrating on the 2/3. So 2/3, we've got thirds in the rows, 3 rows going all the way across, and I'm going to shade in 2 of them. So 1 all the way across, and 2 all the way across. And again, my final step is to count how many got double shaded. And so if I look at my pieces of cake, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 on the top. And how many pieces total? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And so my final answer, and again, you should look at these and ask, can they simplify? 3/8 did not simplify. 8 and 15, there's nothing that will divide 8 that will divide 15, so we're done. If we needed to simplify in the end, we might need to simplify, but that is how you solve a picture, solve a fraction times a fraction with a picture. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, there has to be a shortcut, right? Or maybe you picked up on a pattern that's already happening. If you look at our final answers, where did that 3 come from? Well, it came from the top numbers, right? 1 times 3 is 3. Where did that 8 come from? Well, it's the bottom numbers, 2 times 4. What about over here? Does the same thing work? 4 times 2 gives me 8 on top. Multiply the bottom numbers, 5 times 3 gives me 15 on the bottom. So that is actually our shortcut. So let's look at strategy number 2. Strategy number 2 which is the shortcut. And the shortcut is multiply the top and the bottoms, aka multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So let's look at a couple of examples like that. So what if we just had the problem 5/6 times 3/5? And I want to multiply that fraction times the fraction. Well, our shortcut says that we can just multiply the top two numbers together. 5 times 3, we already set up here is 15. And then on the bottom, we've got 6 times 5. 6 times 5 is 30. Always ask yourself if you can simplify in the end. Well, it's not top heavy, so we don't have to do anything about that, but can we simplify this? And we actually can simplify it. And if you don't know your 15s and your 30 multiples, come out here to the side. The things that will multiply together to get 15 are 1 and 15 and 3 times 5. To get 30, we can do 1 and 30. We can do 2 and 15. We can do 3 and 10. And we can do 5 and 6. But the thing that they have in common here is the 15. So we can actually divide both of these numbers by 15. You might have thought to divide them by 5 at first, then you'd have to divide by 3. 15 divided by 15 is 1. 30 divided by 15 is 2. So our final answer here is actually 1/2. All right. I'm going to give you one to try on your own. So let's try 1/8 times 2/5. 1/8 times 2/5. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can do this one on your own. All right, let's go ahead and check it. So again, we just multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom. 1 times 2 gives me 2. 8 times 5 gives me 40. Ask yourself, can I simplify this? And yes, both of these are even, so we automatically know. We don't even have to write it out. We automatically know since they're both even, they will divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 40 divided by 2 is 20. So your final answer should be 1/20. All right, so those are some examples of, number one, how to look at the model and solve this, and also how to solve using the shortcut of just multiplying straight across. Now, there is a question, a couple of questions on your practice where it might give you just a picture, and it might ask you to write the multiplication. So it might ask, what problem is modeled? And it might just give you a box, a picture like we saw earlier, and it might just give you like a bunch of lines, and it'll have some stuff filled in, and it'll have some stuff going this way, and it might look something like this. So let's just say it looked like that, and then maybe it looked like this. And the question is, what problem is being modeled? And so if you see a model given, no problem. But we want to go sort of backwards and say, okay, here's a picture. I want to know what fraction times what fraction is actually being multiplied here. And so how I would do this is I would, similarly to what we did up here, where we labeled our rows and labeled our columns with numbers, what I want you to do is, if you see a picture like this, I want you to go through and number all of the spaces you see at the top. So 1 space, 2 space, 3, 4, 5. So we have 5 columns running up and down, 5 pieces, 5 times that we, 5 pieces, like slices of cake going up and down. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're just going to label the spaces on the side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going this way as well. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to count how many of those columns are shaded in. So if you can see, there are, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these columns. But how many actually are colored in? Is the first one fully colored in? Yes. Is the second one fully colored in? Yes. Is the third one fully colored in? No, it is not. And so that means there are 2 out of 5 total columns that are being shaded here. And so we would write down 2/5. You could write that either as your first or second fraction. It does not matter which order it comes in. But then we're going to do the same thing with our rows. So again, if we look at our rows, we've got 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5 rows. How many of them are completely shaded in? Well, if we go to the first row, it's completely shaded in orange, yes, but is the second row shaded in? It's got green, but remember the green was going up and down. So no, it is not shaded all the way across. So that means only one of these rows. So 1 is going to be my top number out of how many total rows? There are 5. And so there are going to be a couple questions that just ask, you don't even have to solve it. It's just asking what problem here is being modeled. Now, if we wanted to find our final answer, of course, we could count, again, the double shaded, right? And so the answer here actually becomes 2 double shaded out of a total of, well, if it's a 5 by 5, that means there are 25. And of course, that checks out if we multiply straight across, right? 2 times 1 is 2, 5 times 5 is 25. But there will be a couple questions that ask you about that. So, using the strategy of pictures, using the strategy of the shortcut and multiplying the tops together and the bottoms together and simplifying, and also looking at pictures and finding out what problem is modeled, you should be able to go and do the quizzes now. Please email me if you have any questions.